Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano has been summoned to Rome to face a trial on the accusation of schism. Huge news. I just finished a 2-hour interview with Dr. Gavin Ashenden, who was the Queen's Chaplain, Anglican convert to Catholicism. It was an excellent interview. And during that interview, all this news broke. So I'm jumping back on. Everyone's like, did you see Vigano? Did you see the trial? He's, schism, all this stuff. So I'm jumping back on. Got a little coffee, a little Zen, some water here to go the distance and go some more. I have not been able to fully prepare for this because it's breaking news. I have read Archbishop Vigano's statement. I have seen what Rome has published in the Dicastery for the Doctrine for the Faith. So we're going to read those things. We're going to look at them. We're going to talk about them. And we'll do some Q&A. And I want to also get some of your comments live. Unfortunately, we were kind of late starting because the Twitter live feed is broken. So we're just on Facebook and YouTube today. Before we get started, this is a important topic. I'm a little shocked by it. I have some thoughts about it. So I think we should pray. I think we should pray for everyone in Rome involved, and we should pray for Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano. And I think he would appreciate a Hail Mary. So we're going to pray the Hail Mary together, and then we're going to jump into this and look at the accusations. There's 3 accusations against Archbishop Vigano, and the trial, he's supposed to be there today. I don't know if he's there or not. I haven't heard. Maybe that's been revealed, and I haven't heard of any results or anything yet. Again, this is all breaking. This is all new. And again, I'll just be frank with you. I haven't, other than reading the documents, I haven't prepared a podcast on this just because I had a full 2-hour interview not long ago. So here we go. We'll pray the Hail Mary and we'll jump into it. I'll read the documents and we'll talk about it. Oremus, nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et at hora mortis nostrae. Amen. All right, so what do we know? What's going on? Well, the Vatican Office for Doctrine has summoned Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano to appear before an extrajudicial penal trial today. And there are 3 accusations, all of which fall under the crime, the ecclesiastical crime of schism or schism, depending on where you live and how you speak English. And those 3 accusations listed are Vigano denying the legitimacy of Pope Francis, his pontificate. Is he truly Pope? Rupture of communion with him. So removing yourself from communion with the Pope. And then thirdly, a rejection of the Second Vatican Council. Those are the 3 accusations, and he will go under a penal trial for those 3 accusations. If found guilty, I suspect there will be a decree of excommunication. So that's what's going on. Now, before I read the documents, I just want to give you my stream of thought analysis, initial thoughts of this. This was all done with the knowledge of Pope Francis. Okay, so this has been brewing for a while. This has been brewing since the summer of shame. And to fully understand who Archbishop Vigano is and how it relates to this moment, this day, you have to understand that globally, Catholics have been embarrassed and ashamed about sexual scandals, primarily pedophilia, the molestation of children. It's been a problem in the church, well, for a long time, let's be honest. And over the decades, really beginning in, a lot of this started to come to light in the 80s, 90s, but there was, especially in America, in the Archdiocese of Boston under Cardinal Law, a huge scandal was revealed. And soon Catholics realized that it wasn't just Boston. It wasn't just the Archbishop of Boston, that there was a policy amongst an unspoken, or not, it was spoken amongst them, but a private policy that you could take these priests who had abused young people, you could send them to St. Luke's or some therapy place, ask them, are you okay now? And they'd be like, we're okay now, and just move them around the diocese. Or what's even more scandalous is they would just be traded out, free agent, to other dioceses or to poor places, poor dioceses that needed priests or pastors. And this was all came out in, I think it was 2002. And part of the leadership of, we're going to fix things, we're going to be transparent, was Cardinal McCarrick. And we later learned in 2018 that McCarrick himself had been credibly accused of at least 2, if not more, accounts of child abuse. And you may remember I interviewed, I think it was the first interview, James Grine, and he came on the show. I was not expecting this. He came on the show and he explained what happened to him, and it went viral and it blew up. And people have often said to me, when I watched that interview with you and Grine, like I could just see like the shock and the horror in your face, because again, I wasn't prepared for what came out, and ultimately, there was a case in New York and an accusation in New York, accusing McCarrick of doing something very evil with an altar boy in the sacristy. I think it was at St. Patrick's Cathedral. I might have that memory wrong there. But then also James Grine came forward and said that he was abused in the context of confession, the sacrament of repentance, reconciliation. So those details of not just abuse, but abuse within sacred spaces and within sacraments led to the removal of the clerical state from McCarrick. He was no longer an archbishop, bishop, priest. He was laicized, and Pope Francis removed his office and title of cardinal. And nothing else really happened to McCarrick. And I've been critical about that over the years, that McCarrick got the easy way out. They laicized him. And when you get laicized, you get removed from a lot of the canonical penalties. Just like, for example, if Vigano suddenly got laicized, he wouldn't be able to stand trial as a cleric for these crimes. So that was kind of an easy way out, I think, for Rome, for the Vatican, for Francis, and for McCarrick to just sort of wave the magic wand and make him a layman and sort of remove him from public sight. But the key element here, and again, if you've been watching my podcast for 5 years, you know all this, but I know not everyone has. The key element here is that Vigano published his first epistle. He published an 11-page document revealing that even under Pope Benedict XVI, McCarrick was under a silent censure. He was not allowed to do ministry. He was restricted in his travels, all this. And Vigano accused Pope Francis of reversing that and allowing McCarrick to have public ministry, to travel to China, to work out the Chinese Vatican deal, which was a disaster. It's still a major scandal in the church. People in the West really don't talk about it or care about it because I think they think China's far away. But McCarrick did damage to the church in his role on that as well. I mean, it's scandal upon scandal. And Vigano changed the narrative in 2018. He put the United States Conference of Bishops on watch because he had been the nuncio, the apostolic nuncio from the Vatican to the United States, which means he was sort of the ambassador or the bridge or the lifeline of communication between American bishops and Rome. And by the way, Vigano was also involved in an expose of the Vatican Bank under Benedict XVI. He kind of got in trouble with Vatican bureaucrats, and then Benedict sent him to America to be the nuncio, where again he uncovered more problems. And if you want to know that everything I'm saying, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot of documentation. This is actual Catholic history at this point. This is in particular American Catholic history, and I tell that whole story and document it in a chapter in my book, Infiltration. So again, I'm not trying to hawk books here, but if you want to hear the story and kind of get the timeline of how all this shook out, I document it all in Infiltration. And a lot of people are kind of mad at me that I did that. Zero regrets. All right, this story has to be told. So I'm just kind of giving y'all the background. If you want to go deeper, get the book, read about it. So here's my thought. Again, I haven't prepared a show for it, but here's my stream of consciousness thought. Pope Francis is going to win this war. There's no way Vigano is going to win this trial. So the Vatican, the Dicastery on Doctrine, Francis, they're going to win on this. But they're going to take a mortal wound. And Francis is going to take a mortal wound on this. And here's why. I don't think Europeans, and definitely not Vatican bureaucrats, cardinals, do not fully appreciate that. They don't appreciate how much American Catholics appreciate and revere Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano. In the last 2 years, I'll be the first to admit, Archbishop Vigano has gotten more radical, more articulate, and has said things that even make traditional Catholics and people who like Archbishop Vigano uncomfortable. A lot of the early advocates and cheerleaders of Archbishop Vigano have gone quiet. They've gone cold. They kind of feel like he's going a little too far. You know, he teaches church, counter church, eclipse of the church, the Bergoglian church. We'll see that in a moment. But all that being said, Catholics in America, in the last 10 years, the biggest hit that we have taken is McCarrick. And it's a scandal that involves American bishops, American cardinals, the Vatican, and Pope Benedict, may he rest in peace, and Pope Francis. It's all tangled together. Francis will win this battle, but he'll take a mortal wound. And here's what I mean. It will appear to the world that Pope Francis and the Vatican Dicastery for Doctrine are punishing Archbishop Vigano for being a whistleblower. That is the narrative that people will see, that people will feel. It will probably be the narrative that goes down in the history books. So you win the battle, but I don't want to say you lose the war, but you definitely take a hit. And I think, you know, a lot of people have said, I can't believe it's taken this long, 5 years, for Francis to discipline Archbishop Vigano. And I think the reason it's taken half a decade is they realize that in the court of public perception, this will look like the Vatican punishing the most notable whistleblower against the most notable cardinal who was credibly accused of molesting children in sacramental context. This is a perception, and this is a story that will blow up, that will grow, and it will tarnish the legacy of Pope Francis. Whether you love Francis or not, this looks like the cancellation of a whistleblower. And that right there is just my initial perception of how this is all going to go down. Whether you love Vigano or not, love Pope Francis or not, whatever. This is the narrative. I also, before I read the documents, I also perceive, as someone who reads and follows Vatican News, Pope Francis, reads what he does, comments on it, I think at this point, after 5 years, I am qualified to talk about it, whether you agree with me or not on my conclusions. I perceive that the Vatican bureaucrats, the Curia, do not understand the feeling of hurt by American Catholics. and not to toot my own horn, but I think the growth of my platform as an American Catholic, who is a traditional Catholic, I attend the traditional Latin Mass, but I think the growth of the audience that is, I am an American Catholic. Again, I just say I'm a dad on a webcam, right? My background is a PhD in philosophy, a professor, a teacher, an author. That's really who I consider myself, not as a journalist or anything. But I think people, especially American Catholics, watch this podcast and want to know, what does Taylor Marshall think about whatever? Because I'm just saying what American Catholics feel, what American Catholics perceive, and what a lot of American Catholics are afraid to articulate. And there's a lot of frustration and a sense of deep betrayal. And I don't think Pope Francis or the Vatican Curia understand that, perceive that, or acknowledge it. Instead, what we see from Pope Francis is, this schismatic mentality, this rigid mentality in the United States, and they take it personally instead of understanding it pastorally, which they always claim, we're pastoral, you got to be pastoral. But the greatest pastoral wound in the American Catholic heart is the betrayal and the mismanagement of the Cardinal McCarrick crimes. And the Cardinal McCarrick crimes don't stand alone. That is an icon. That is a meme of the repeated examples in the newspapers. I mean, we had one just in Dallas within the last month or two of yet another priest who was credibly accused of molesting girls and was removed. I don't know how that's gone forward, but it's just a kick in the gut. And I'll just be honest, as a Texan, it's a kick in the balls, okay, to have this over and over again. And the McCarrick narrative shows that Rome didn't take it seriously. Rome keeps brushing it under the rug. And for us to see an archbishop, all right, Catholics revere the offices, an archbishop, Vigano, who was apostolic nuncio, so he was the lifeline between Rome and the bishops of the United States, to see that person come out in the public and say, here's what I've seen, here's where the abuses are, and I can't remain quiet anymore. For the sake of my own salvation, I have to come out and say it. The hearts of American Catholics, whether you think Vigano's too radical or not, they're like, finally, it's not one of our own American bishops, but it's a archbishop connected to American Catholicism. Finally, somebody said something and revealed the inner workings, the inner mechanisms. Like we saw how the nasty sausage was made. And then just to be disappointed with how McCarrick was handled. And the United States bishops, they voted not to do the investigation. Bishop Strickland was the only one who stood up and articulated it and said, I think it also has to do with the problem with same-sex attraction within not only the priesthood, but the episcopate. And then what did we American Catholics experience? Pastoral accompaniment, as we're told by the Jesuits constantly? No. Then Strickland was canceled. So if you're a non-American Catholic watching this and you kind of want to understand, how does Taylor Marshall think? And how do Catholic Americans think? And what are the wounds? What are the concerns? These are the wounds and concerns. And I would beg, I know this is going to be a big story, but I would beg people in the Vatican to either explain what I'm trying to explain now live on YouTube to Pope Francis, or to show, at least clip out this segment, the last 5-10 minutes of what I've said, show that to Pope Francis. Say, do you realize that you're dealing with a wounded demographic that is huge? And have you, as a pastor, as a shepherd, as a priest, as a vicar of Christ, responsibly ministered to these people, or have you beaten them down? Do they feel unheard? Do they feel ridiculed? And why is it that they would feel so much filial veneration for Archbishop Vigano in the United States? Is it just because we're waspy, or we're Anglophone, or because we're, cowboys down in Texas, or we're rebellious, we're independent-minded, we're entrepreneurial, we're whatever they want to call us, capitalists, rigid? Or is there something? I mean, as a father, I got 8 kids. All right, we have 8 children, beautiful children. When one of your children are hurting, calling them names or pulling down some discipline on them doesn't work. You have to seek to understand your children. I'm just talking as a dad right now. You have to seek to understand the way your children are thinking, the way your children are perceiving a situation. Often children think this is not fair. Sometimes you just say, well, life isn't fair. But deeper than that is you want your children to thrive. I want all my children, all 8 of my children, to be, more holy than me, have greater faith than me, greater charity, to love the poor more than me, to have, a deeper devotion to the Mass, and a deeper devotion to even the Holy Father and the Pope. I want all my children to excel beyond me, right? It's not just that I want to have a legacy. I love them, and I want them to experience life and Christianity and Christ in a deeper and more beautiful way than I have. My wife and I tell them, we want to do whatever we can to set y'all up to be even better than us. Like that's what we do as parents. And I just sense in the church, and again, I'm speaking from the heart here, I sense in the church that the priests, the bishops, the cardinals, and yes, even Pope Francis, they don't care. And they're frustrated and they're annoyed with us. And so this is the story. All right. So Pope Francis, if you're watching, cardinals, if you're watching, this is the story. This is the feeling. So in order for you to understand Archbishop Vigano in his place in the narrative, you need to understand what is being experienced, because so many of the United States dioceses have gone bankrupt. I don't know what the number is. And hundreds of millions, I think we're in the billions, but I'll just say hundreds of millions of dollars that have been donated by the Catholic lay people, by the Catholic grandmas and grandpas, and the working class fathers and mothers who are putting money in the plate, money in the basket, and are writing those $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 checks to the annual bishop appeal, diocesan appeal, seeing the diocese go bankrupt, seeing churches close, seeing yet another sexual abuse crisis, another payout, more lawyers taking more money. It hurts so bad. And the only one that we have seen in America to be vocal about it was Archbishop Vigano. And then later, Bishop Strickland. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? All right, let's look at some of the, I'm going to go to the comments real quick before I read. I just want to get a feel for y'all out there. Am I off base, or do you feel or sense the same things that I'm trying to articulate? All right. Bink says, this is a time of agony for the church. Do not abandon her or sleep or shrug. I agree. This is a time of agony. I was telling a friend, Clay, yesterday, 2 nights ago, I was praying the rosary First sorrowful mystery, agony in the garden. And I really connected with agony in the garden while I prayed the rosary that time. Of all the 5 mysteries that evening, agony in the garden, I was thinking, Christ, you knew what was about to happen. You knew what you had to go through. You know, Father, take this chalice from me, but not my will, but thy will. You knew, and then you just proceeded fully 100% into the passion. The fact that there's a moment in the Gospels where Christ is praying and he's looking into the next 24 hours of his passion and he's in agony and then he pushes through, that is a deep theological mystery for all of us. You can't look into the passion of what has to be done and run away. Like Peter, when he was denied Christ 3 times. You have to be like Christ, like Our Lady who goes all the way to the cross, and you have to look into it, experience the agony in the garden, and then say, let's press forward. Great comment. Got some super chats. Let's look at those. This is from Lord of the Rings 25. There are many Catholics, priests, bishops, cardinals, etc., that have issues with Vatican II and the new liturgy to include the SSPX. Is he going to excommunicate everyone that disagrees? You know, I have to wonder, you know, with these rumors, and they are just rumors, but they seem to be coming from many places, that the Pope is going to cancel and end the traditional Latin Mass next month. Is this the 1-2 combo? You know, Vigano is seen as sort of this traditionalist, rigid, angry, mean Catholic. Cancel him, cancel the TLM, and then all of these wounded people, we just push them into the corral and say, bye-bye, we're done dealing with you, you're excommunicated. You know, we're going to go march in the Pride Parade with the people who are truly in need of our ministry. That's the hard part. Here's another super chat from Lord of the Rings. Catholics question his pontificate due to material heresy. Will they be excommunicated? Yeah, I mean, everything I just said. Now add on to that, we're confused about the papacy. We're confused about teaching. We sense that things that were taught or held by Catholics and by popes and bishops for 2 millennia are being unwound, are being changed. That's all confusing to us as well. So my advice to Pope Francis would be transparent. You know, if people are confused, if there are dubia in the church, that's the official word, right? If there are doubts, questionable doubts, address them full on. If there are wounds, if there are scandals, address them full on. Logan Misiak says, at this point, I wonder who the next pope will be. I have very strong thoughts on that. Perhaps I'll make a video in the future. Make sure you're subscribed to get it. All right, let's look now at what the statements say. So in case you're just joining us a little bit late, in the opening of today's podcast, I talked about how Archbishop Vigano has been summoned to Rome today, June 20th, for the crime of schism. And the 3 accusations are, quote, public statements which result in a denial of these elements necessary to maintain communion with the Catholic Church. 1, denial of the legitimacy of Pope Francis. 2, rupture of communion with him. 3, rejection of the Second Vatican Council. So the trial, which is called an extrajudicial criminal trial for schism, will be on these 3 accusations. Whether or not Vigano is in Rome, is responding to this, I don't have any word on that yet. And if you do know, let me know in the comments and in the questions. So now we're going to look at what Archbishop Vigano has stated publicly. He put out a statement, and let me see if I can add it onto the screen here. Perfect. It worked. Okay, great. So this is from Archbishop Vigano's website, Exsurge Domine, which it's from the Psalms, but it's also, I believe, the papal document against Martin Luther. Okay, so here it is. And yeah, let's just read it. Let's go. So here's the opening paragraph. I put it on the screen if you want to follow with me, or you can go to exsurgedomine.it and read it there. The Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith has informed me with a simple email of the initiation of an extrajudicial penal trial against me with the accusation of having committed the crime of schism and charging me of having denied the legitimacy of Pope Francis, which he puts in scare quotes, of having broken communion with him, and of having rejected the Second Vatican Council. I have been summoned to the Palace of the Holy Office on June 20th, that's today, in person or represented by a canon lawyer. Okay, so he can send a delegate. I assume that the sentence has already been prepared, given that it is an extrajudicial process. Next paragraph. I regard the accusations against me as an honor. I believe that the very wording of the charges confirms the theses that I have repeatedly defended in my various addresses. It is no coincidence that the accusation against me concerns the questioning of the legitimacy of Jorge Mario Bergoglio and the rejection of Vatican II. The council represents the ideological, theological, moral, and liturgical cancer of which the Bergoglian Synodal Church is the necessary metastasis. So right there, he's just going rejecting Vatican II. He calls it the cancer. It's a cancer that is theological, moral, and liturgical. Now we get a big paragraph here. All right, let's break it into pieces. It is necessary for the episcopate, the clergy, and the people of God to seriously ask themselves whether it is consistent with the profession of the Catholic faith to passively witness the systematic destruction of the church by its leaders, just as other subversives are destroying civil society. Globalism calls for ethnic substitution. Bergoglio promotes uncontrolled immigration and calls for the integration of cultures and religions. Globalism supports LGBTQ plus ideology. Bergoglio authorizes the blessing of same-sex couples and imposes on the faithful the acceptance of homosexualism, while covering up the scandals of his protégés and promoting them to the highest positions of responsibility. Globalism imposes the green agenda. Bergoglio worships the idol of Pachamama, writes delirious encyclicals about the environment, supports the Agenda 2030, and attacks those who question the theory of man-made global warming. He goes beyond his role in matters that strictly pertain to science, but always and only in one direction, a direction that is diametrically opposed to what the church has always taught. Take another slice of this paragraph here. Continuing to read Archbishop Vigano. He, Bergoglio, has mandated the use of experimental gene serums, which cause very serious damage, death, and sterility, calling them, quote, an act of love, in exchange for funding from pharmaceutical companies and philanthropic foundations. His total alignment with the Davos religion is scandalous. Wherever governments at the service of the World Economic Forum have introduced or have extended abortion, promoted vice, legitimized homosexual unions or gender transition, encouraged euthanasia, and tolerated the persecution of Catholics, not a word has been spent in defense of the faith or morals that are threatened, or in support of the civil battles of so many Catholics who have been abandoned by the Vatican and the bishops. Continuing Vigano here. Not a word. Not a word for the persecuted Catholics in China, with the complicity of the Holy See, which considers Beijing's billions more important than the lives and freedom of thousands of Chinese who are faithful to the Roman Church. In the, quote, synodal church, presided over by Bergoglio, no schism is recognized among the German episcopate or among the government-appointed bishops who have been consecrated in China without the mandate of Rome, because their action is consistent with the destruction of the church, and therefore must be concealed, minimized, tolerated, and finally encouraged. In these 11 years of pontificate, the Catholic Church has been humiliated and discredited above all because of the scandals and corruption of the leaders of the hierarchy, which have been totally ignored, even as the most ruthless Vatican authoritarianism raged against the faithful priests and religious, small communities of traditional nuns, and communities tied to the Latin Mass. I'm going to pause here. I just interviewed Dr. Gavin, and after the show, we're talking about who could be the next pope, what my thoughts are on who are the three cardinals who likely could be elected as the next pope. And I said something to him that I think is worth repeating here live on the podcast, and that is, even the most liberal, heretical, modernists, bishops, archbishops, and cardinals in the Catholic Church right now, although they probably appreciate that the St. Gallen Mafia agenda has been pushed forward rather successfully by Pope Francis and others, they all recognize and they all regret that the stock price, to use an analogy, of the Catholic Church has crashed. Globally, in culture, even amongst the United Nations and the EU, and even in the side of Democrats, the Democratic Party in the United States, the Catholic Church, her usefulness and her prestige, her place in society has taken a nosedive. It's like watching a man jump from a high dive into a parking lot. The status of the church in the world has been degraded under Pope Francis. And I think when the next conclave happens and the cardinals assemble to elect the next pope, of course, the liberals are going to just want to be liberal, right? They're going to want to push more and more progressive theology, documents, and ambiguity moving forward. But they are also concerned that they are doing damage to the brand. It used to mean something when you talked about the Catholic Church. Of course, Protestants were always opposed to the Catholic Church, but it was still an institution of importance, influence, prestige. Archbishop Vigano points out, yes, Bergoglio, worked with the pharmaceutical companies, and he works with the Davos agenda and the 2030 agenda. So in that case, he is lending the credentials and the prestige of the Catholic Church to some of these globalist agendas. But in doing so, it's kind of like the U.S. dollar, right? It has an important place in the world. But if you just keep printing more U.S. dollars and inflating the currency, you are devaluing the currency. And that same analogy is happening in the Catholic Church. So I think the cardinals may be interested, honestly. They may be interested in saying, okay, let's pause things a little bit. Can we recapture some prestige, some dignity for the church? I think Archbishop Vigano would say they have no interest in that. They really want to run the thing in the ground. Time will tell. All right, I'm going to keep going here. Share the screen. This is the Archbishop Vigano statement. Archbishop Vigano continues, this one-sided zeal is reminiscent of Cromwell's fanaticism, typical of those who defy providence in the presumption of knowing that they are finally at the top of the hierarchical pyramid, free to do and undo as they please without anyone objecting to anything. In this work of destruction, this willingness to renounce the salvation of souls in the name of a human peace that denies God is not an invention of Bergoglio, but the main and unmentionable purpose of those who used a council to contradict the Catholic magisterium and to begin to demolish the church from within. In small steps, but always in a single direction, always with the indulgent tolerance or culpable inaction, if not the explicit approval of Roman authorities. Think about that. The Catholic Church, he goes on, has been slowly but surely taken over, and Bergoglio has been given the task of masking it a philanthropic agency, the Church of humanity, of inclusion, and of the environment, at the service of the New World Order. But this is not the Catholic Church. It is her counterfeit. Continuing. Here's how much more we have to go. Quite a bit. Hang with me. And then we'll do comments and questions. He now talks about Pope Benedict XVI. He says, quote, the resignation of Benedict XVI and the appointment of the Sant Gall Mafia of a successor in line with the diktats of the Agenda 2030 was intended to allow and has succeeded in allowing the global coup to take place with the complicity and authoritative support of the Church of Rome. Bergoglio is to the Church what other world leaders are to their nations: traitors, subversives, and final liquidators of traditional society who are certain of impunity. Bergoglio's defect of consent, vitium consensus, in accepting his election is based precisely on the evident alienity of his action of government and magisterium with respect to what any Catholic of any age expects from the Vicar of Christ and the successor of the Prince of the Apostles. I'm going to pause here. His reference here to the vitium consensus, or the lacking of consent, is Archbishop Vigano's answer to whether Pope Francis is the Pope. There are different theories on this. There is the Sede Vacantis 1958 thesis, which says in 1958, the election of John the 23rd was invalid, false, and therefore there has not been a Pope since 1958. That's your Sede Vacantis. And by the way, I map out all these different options and beliefs towards the end of Infiltration. That's one take. Another is that Pope Benedict XVI never really resigned. He did not resign the munus of the papal office. He only resigned the ministerium, so his resignation was invalid. But Vigano, he has a take that I think is unique to him. I think he maybe coined it. I'm not sure. But it is the lack of consent. And he says, just as a man and a woman, when they're getting married at the altar, if the woman getting married says, I don't like this guy, but he's really rich. He's a billionaire. So I'm just going to say the vows here. I don't really want to be married to him, and I'm going to divorce him in 5 years. I don't really believe in the sacrament of marriage. And then I'm going to get half the money. And so she goes through with the vows. Well, Catholic theology says that that was not a valid sacrament of matrimony because both spouses, the husband and the wife, have to consent. They have to say the vows, and they have to intend them. They have to consent to them. So alternatively, if you're in a wedding and, a guy got a girl pregnant and the father said, he was a mafia guy, he says, if you don't marry my daughter who you got pregnant, you're going to be shot with a shotgun. That's more of the South. That's more of the Texas. I guess the mafia would be, you're going to swim with the fishes. You're going to be killed. We're going to throw you in the sea. So the young man goes and gets married in the church, but he doesn't really intend to marry this woman. He's just doing it under duress. That also would be an invalid marriage. It would be null. So Archbishop Vigano's thinking is, well, Francis, when he was elected Pope in 2013, when he consented to become Pope, he didn't consent to be the vicar of Christ, the successor of St. Peter, the guardian of orthodoxy, and to protect and defend the deposit of faith given by Jesus Christ to the apostles. When he consented to the papacy, he consented in order to revise and even destroy the church. And since he lacked proper consent at his election would have been for him, but his consent to receive the munus, the office of the papacy, is invalid, and therefore he is not Pope. That is the theory of Archbishop Vigano, if I understand it correctly. So I just wanted to clarify that. All right, moving along here to this. Here we talk about the Antichrist. Ready? This is also principally an offense against the divine head of the church, our Lord Jesus Christ, whose sacred authority Bergoglio claims to exercise for the detriment of the mystical body with an action that is too systematic and coherent to appear to be the fruit of mere incapacity. In the work of Bergoglio and his circle, the Lord's warning is put to practice. Beware of false prophets who come to you in the guise of lambs, but who are ravenous wolves of heart. Matthew 7:15. Vigano says, quote, I am honored to have, and indeed I do not want, any ecclesial communion with them. Theirs is a lobby which conceals its complicity with the masters of the world in order to deceive many souls and prevent any resistance against the establishment of the kingdom of the Antichrist. Now he turns his attention to the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. Vigano says, in face of the dicastery's accusation, I claim, as successor of the apostles, to be in full communion with Rome, with the Roman Catholic Apostolic Church, with the magisterium of the Roman pontiffs, and with the uninterrupted doctrinal, moral, and liturgical tradition which they have faithfully preserved. He then says, I repudiate the neo-modernist errors inherent in the Second Vatican Council and in the so-called post-conciliar magisterium, in particular in matters of collegiality, ecumenism, religious freedom, the secularity of the state, and the liturgy. There he is, 5 rejections of the Second Vatican Council. He then repudiates some more. He says, I repudiate, reject, and condemn the scandals, errors, and heresies of Jorge, Mario, Bergoglio, who manifest an absolutely tyrannical management of power exercised against the purpose that legitimizes authority in the church, an authority that is vicarious of that of Christ, and as such must obey him, capital H, him, Jesus, alone. This separation of the papacy from its legitimizing principle, which is Christ, the high priest, transforms the ministerium into a self-referential tyranny. And I'll remind you that St. Robert Bellarmine said that if a pope in the future were to be a manifest heretic or a tyrant, and he gives the example, for example, if he were to excommunicate every member of the church, leaving the pope alone as the only member of the church, if he were to be a tyrant or a manifest heretic, he would fall ipso facto immediately from the papacy if he had it. Now, I think Vigano believes that Francis Bergoglio never had it. So he's not making that exact argument of St. Robert Bellarmine. Vigano says, no Catholic worthy of the name can be in communion with this Bergoglian church because it acts in clear discontinuity and rupture with all the popes of history and with the Church of Christ. So here you see that in the trial at the Vatican, most certainly they're going to find Archbishop Vigano guilty on all counts. His rejection of the legitimacy of the papacy of Bergoglio, his failure to be in communion with him, and the rejection of the Second Vatican Council, of which he gives 5 objections earlier, namely collegiality, ecumenism, religious freedom, secularity of the state, and the liturgy, the change in the liturgy. All right, now we come to the end, and I appreciate your perseverance with me, but it's worth it. I mean, this is a big moment, and I think, I'd love for Archbishop Vigano to come on the podcast. I've already invited him. So if you like that idea, please like the show. Be great to get Archbishop Vigano in his own words, but this is his prepared statement. So I think it's worth our time reading. Now, Archbishop Vigano talks about the legacy of Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. Who is Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre? He, in 1970, started a seminary and a society for priests who wanted to celebrate. Well, initially, they wanted to be ordained in the traditional 7 orders, the 4 minor orders, and then the 3 greater orders of subdeacon, deacon, priest in the old forms, not in the new forms, the new ordination rites. And so he founded a seminary and a society called the Priestly Society of St. Pius X. Why Pius X? Because he was the hammer of the modernists. He fought hard in the papacy to eradicate modernism, which he called the synthesis of all heresies, from the priesthood and from the seminaries and from the academies. So now Archbishop Vigano appeals to the legacy of Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. And I sense as we move forward in this moment of church history, the discussion of who was Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, what did he do, and was he right or wrong, is going to come to the forefront. So Archbishop Vigano says, 50 years ago, in that same palace of the Holy Office, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre was summoned and accused of schism for rejecting Vatican II. His defense is mine. His words are mine, and his arguments are mine. Arguments before which the Roman authorities could not condemn him for heresy, having to wait instead for him to consecrate bishops so as to have the pretext of declaring him schismatic, and then revoking his excommunication when he was already dead. The scheme is repeated even after half a century has demonstrated Archbishop Lefebvre's prophetic choice. And it's interesting, in 2024, that's the year we're in now, there is a growing consensus, not just amongst the SSPX, not just amongst traditionalists, not just amongst, even communities of the Fraternity of St. Peter, Institute of Christ the King, diocesan Latin masses, but even amongst people who attend the Novus Ordo and are not part of a traditional priestly society or don't attend Mass at a traditional priestly society. There's a growing consensus that Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre was right. They may not agree with the 1988 consecrations, but his conviction that the traditional Roman rite, and I don't say Latin Mass here, I say the Roman rite because it includes the traditional Latin Mass, the traditional Roman baptism, traditional confirmation, traditional confession, traditional matrimonial rite, marriage, all 7 sacraments, extreme unction, the ordination rites, the divine office, the devotions, the formation, the seminary formation, the traditional seminary formation, which we've gotten away from. And you have priests now saying the most heretical things from pulpits and doing some of the most heretical and scandalous things. Marcel Lefebvre was right. Things swung too far away from the received tradition of the Roman Catholic Church. He was kind of like a bad boy, he's like Dark Knight of the 1970s. Now Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre is mainstream. I mean, I've met, I don't want to reveal anyone's names, but, I was talking to a family once and they had a new baby and the baby was baptized Marcel. This was not at the SSPX, by the way. This is not at SSPX Chapel. I said, oh, Marcel, interesting. Oh, we named him after Marcel Lefebvre. Such are the times. And again, you may be totally opposed to Archbishop Vigano, and you may not agree with his conclusions here. But I think it represents definitely not a Lutheran moment, because Martin Luther was denying the holy sacrifice of the Mass. He was denying chunks of Catholic doctrine. Here with Lefebvre and with Vigano, they are not saying I'm Bible alone, right? Or my interpretation of the Bible. They're just saying, and Lefebvre always said this, he's like, I just want to say the Mass that I was ordained to say when I was a young man. Like when I got out of seminary, I was ordained. They said, here's the Mass. I just want to say that Mass. I don't want to do a new one. I want to do the old one. And when I baptize a baby, I want to baptize a baby like I always did in Africa. Right? So they're not saying, Luther was saying, I want to have a new Mass. He had the Deutsch Mass, right? His Mass that he wrote and designed. He did his own Bible. He added a word in Romans 3:28. Luther added alone. He said, man is justified by faith alone. It's not in the Greek, not in the Latin. But Luther said, I'm putting it in there. So Luther was creating his own Bible, his own liturgy, his own dogma, his own doctrine, his own Augsburg Confession with Melanchthon. He was creating something new. Lefebvre and now Vigano are just saying, I just want to do what was already there. And the hard thing about that is how do you accuse that of being heretical? Because if you accuse that as being heretical, then you accuse centuries of priests, bishops, and popes as heretical, right? You got to get them on something else. And so what they're getting them on is you reject Bergoglio and you reject Vatican II. Part of the power play here, and you've seen it with negotiations with SSPX, is they're like, okay, well, does Vatican II change any doctrine in the Catholic Church? Are there any reversals or changes? And they'll say, well, no, not at all. And they're like, well, what is in Vatican II that's not already in the Catholic Church? And there's silence, right? No one on the liberal side wants to say, well, we changed religious liberty or the secularity of the state, or we changed, what is meant by church, subsisted, et cetera. They don't want to, because if they say we changed, well, then that, it reveals that there was a change and you can't change Catholicism. So it's a catch-22. Final comment here by Archbishop Vigano, and then we'll do some comments and questions. He says, in these times of apostasy, and apostasy means denying Christ, leaving the church. In these times of apostasy, Catholics will find in pastors faithful to the mandate received from our Lord, an example and an encouragement to abide in the truth of Christ. Depositum custodi, according to the apostles' exhortation. That means guard the deposit. I believe that's in Jude's epistle. Might be wrong on that. As the time approaches when I will have to give an account to the Son of God of all my actions, I intend to persevere in the bonum certimum and not to fail in the witness of faith, which is required of each one who, as bishop, has been endowed with the fullness of the priesthood and constituted successor of the apostles. I invite all Catholics, says Vigano, to pray that the Lord will come to the aid of his church and give courage to those who are persecuted for their faith. Signed, Carlo Maria Vigano, Archbishop, June 20th, 2024. There it is. So now we'll turn to comments and questions. We have over 2,600 people with us live, so there's a lot of people there. And there's a live chat on YouTube here. If you're watching on Facebook, you can also enter into the live chat. I can see both of those right now through my interface here. So I'm going to jump in and look at the super chats first and then get in there. Lots of super chats from Just Listening. Thank you. Pete G says, thoughts on the Latin Mass shutdown in Melbourne? I think it's horrible. I think it's sad, and I think one day we'll get it back, God willing. But yeah, I saw the pictures that were on Twitter. People were taking pictures. This is our last traditional Latin Mass in Melbourne. Very sad. Loves Our Lady says, Archbishop Lefebvre, pray for us. Let me look through here. Okay, good. Now I'm going to more comments and questions from Facebook and from YouTube. Give me a moment here just to get adjusted. All right. Red Pill says, we have had much worse popes. The job is for life. I don't think, my opinion is we haven't had worse popes. You had popes who had, who did moral evils. They did bad stuff, right? But I think the difficulty with Bergoglio, with Pope Francis, is that you have confusion about the doctrine of the faith. For the first time in history, you have Catholics who disagree on Catholicism. And that disagreement and that confusion is fostered, it is fermented in the vial, in the petri dish at the Vatican. So that's, because remember, a pope having a mistress, that's bad, right? He's endangering his soul to go to hell. And it scandalizes the faithful, right? That's all bad, right? But creating confusion in the teachings of Jesus Christ, of what you have to believe, that right there affects people much more deeply, if that makes sense. So I respectfully disagree with that. I think this is the worst pope of all time. Other people in the so Red Pill fights back. She says the Borgias. Yeah, the Borgias, weren't great. But was anyone confused on basics of Catholic doctrine? Was he going around saying, I kind of think hell's empty? Or, yeah, bless same-sex couples, qua couples. Confusion on sexual morality. Or did the Borgias ever say, yeah, people who are divorced and remarried and living with another person without an annulment and without marriage can receive the Eucharist with pastoral accompaniment? No. So these things right here are chipping away at faith and morals. And the job of the Pope is to secure and to guard faith and morals. That's why he is given the charism of papal infallibility. The charism of papal infallibility does not make the Pope holy or a saint. The charism of papal infallibility makes sure that when he declares and dogmatizes faith and morals ex cathedra, he's infallible. He's protected by the Holy Spirit. So that shows that the vocation of Pope has to do with faith and morals. That's the unique gift given to the papacy. Unrelated, will you address your thoughts on the movie Jesus Thirsts in a later podcast? I don't know what that is, but maybe I'll look into it. Here is Big Gator Caesar. The previous popes may have been bad, sexual sins, etc., but they never attacked the teachings of the church. Yeah, you said it great, Big Gator. That's what I'm trying to say too. It is scandalous for a pope to have a mistress or have a sexual sin. That's bad, but it's even worse. It's kind of like you got a guy who's the guard at the bank. He knows all the codes, right? He's there to protect whatever's put in the vault. Safety deposit boxes, rings, jewels, gold watches, stacks and racks of currency, money, right? And he's the guy who's paid to do that. Well, it's bad if that guy cheats on his wife, right, and is a drunk. That's bad. You're like, oh, man, that guy's supposed to be upstanding. He's guarding everybody's, important, valuable items. But it's even worse if he is stealing or letting people in and out of the vault. Right? His job is to keep the vault secure, right? It's bad if he's a drunk or he's an adulterer or womanizer. But if he's violating the trust of what he is hired to do, why he was placed at that position, that's worse. That's how I understand it. Maybe you agree or disagree. Right. I haven't seen so many people in the live chat say, I agree with Vigano or I disagree with Vigano. I'm just curious. I've read for you the entire statement. Do you agree or do you disagree? Let me know. Barbara Volek says, what does anyone expect from a pope from Argentina, the country that hid Nazis during World War II? I don't think Argentinians are like bad people per se, right? I don't think that affects. What do I expect from a pope from Argentina? The same thing I expect from a pope from any country, Italy or wherever, to be a successor of the apostles and to use the keys of the kingdom to guard and protect the faith and morals of the church. That's what I expect. I don't expect World Youth Days. I don't expect rock star appearances. I don't expect the Pope to go and sit in a chair at the UN or at the EU. I don't expect the Pope to go have photo ops with the President of the United States or to travel around the world. I don't expect the Pope to do any of that. In fact, I wish he wouldn't. I, as a Catholic, expect the Pope to be a successor of St. Peter and use the keys of the kingdom given in Matthew 16 to preserve, protect, and guard the faith and morals of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. That's it. And as a Catholic, I believe in that dogmatically, and I would die for it. I'm not becoming Eastern Orthodox. I believe in the papacy. I believe in Vatican I. Joseph says, I agree with him. I expect the Pope to be Catholic. Exactly. Can we agree with that? All right, there are people coming in here now and they say, agree with Vigano. A lot of people are agreeing with Vigano. Well, everybody, agree. Vigano has not lied. Laura says, Archbishop Vigano said those who oppose the New World Order will have extra protection. I think you mean their spiritual protection. I don't see anyone who disagrees with Vigano. Is there anyone there? I'd like to entertain any opposing thoughts. Does anyone disagree with Vigano? Everyone agrees? This is unanimous? I'm shocked, honestly. I'm shocked because Archbishop Vigano is saying some pretty heavy things here. He's saying Francis is not the Pope. Bergoglio is not the Pope. He's not in communion with him. He's in communion with the Roman Church and the successors of Peter, and he's rejecting Vatican II on 5 grounds. Do y'all agree with that? Do 2,500 people agree with that? Albert Belt says, do you think guys in the Vatican are wicked now, Taylor? No, I don't think everyone in the Vatican is wicked. I've met many of them. I think there are good people there. But I think the leadership is rotten. I really do. I really do. If y'all saw my interview with Father Charles Murr, excellent interview. I need to have him back on. Father Murr said, going back in the 80s, when he was working at the Vatican, there were hierarchs there. There were priests, bishops, cardinals that did not believe in God. Atheists working in the Vatican. If that was true back then, what is true now? Right? All right, looking through here, agree. Yep, agree with Vigano. Wow. Oh, here we go. Alphabet Soup. I don't agree with him. We have one person saying they don't agree with Vigano. Here's another person that says they disagree with Vigano. Jim Verta. So I'm curious, if you disagree with Vigano, why do you disagree with him? Got a couple more super chats coming in. Let me go hit those up. PJ Cornell. From the outside looking in, Pope Francis looks like a servant of the World Economic Forum and maybe even a friend of Lucis Trust. Okay, so PJ, I guess you're not a Catholic, but that's your take. Cardboard Cape, super chat says, Francis is the worst because he's doctrinally bad. Okay. back to your comments and questions. Melissa says, Francis systematically trying to dismantle the Catholic Church. Do y'all agree with Vigano on that? Is Francis just sort of a naive Jesuit with bad training, bumbling his way through the pontificate? Or is there malice? Is there ill will? Is he trying to destroy? Is he trying to do a Saint Gallen mafia agenda, which would undermine the Catholic Church? Or the Alta Vendita, which I talk about in Infiltration. Is this Alta Vendita situation? What's the Alta Vendita? It was a Freemasonic written game plan to infiltrate the Catholic Church over a 100-year period. I talk about it at length in Infiltration. If you want a signed copy of Infiltration, by the way, you can go to patreon.com/Dr. Taylor Marshall. There are different levels there. And I'll send you a hardback in the mail. There's different levels, though. You got to look at it. But if you want to support my work, my writing, my podcast, my YouTube channel, and these things I do, you can help me out at patreon.com/Dr. Taylor Marshall at certain levels. You can also get assigned. I'll sign it at that table right back there. Sign it and send it to you. And while we're at it, if you want to take, we talked about the Latin Mass. If you want to take my online course on the Roman Rite and the traditional Latin Mass, I'll teach you all the prayers in Latin very slowly. I use a very slow cadence, and I teach you Pater Noster, qui es in caelis, and we go through the Latin, how to pronounce it. All the prayers, I walk through the entire Latin Mass, explain what all the rituals, the rubrics, the words, what's going on, the different kinds of Latin Mass, low Mass, sung Mass, high Mass, pontifical Mass, how to set your ribbons in the Missal, just a thorough, exhaustive course on the traditional Latin Mass. I also have a course on church history, church fathers, medieval and counter-Reformation. So if you want to take online courses with me online, take your faith to the next level, bite-sized, join our community. Join our institute. It's called the New St. Thomas Institute, nsti.com. There's summer enrollment. Please join us at nsti.com. There's an online library. You got the Douay-Rheims, the Greek, the Latin, the church fathers, East and West, just tons of resources. It's basically, as a Catholic, everything I want for my research library, it's all nsti.com. I just built it out. So there it is, nsti.com. Please join. All right, here is a counter take. This is Logos Triumphant Clips. Vigano is a schismatic. No denying that. Francis absolutely should go through with this. We need to respect the authority of the office either way. So that's one take on it. Logos Triumphant Clips. He says Vigano's a schismatic, man. He's Francis is the real pope, and according to Logos Triumphant Clips, if you reject that, you're schismatic, you're done. And it's interesting, too. Thomas Aquinas, in the Summa Theologiae, when he's talking about the theological virtues, he talks about heresy versus schism. And it might be worth our time to break that down. Heresy is the denial of at least one doctrine in the Catholic Church. So if you say, I believe there are 6 sacraments in the Catholic Church, you're a heretic. You have denied one doctrine. You don't have to deny a bunch of them. You just have to deny one. If you say, I believe Mary is a sinner, or I believe Mary had children after Jesus, you're a heretic. And heresy is the sin against faith. So there's faith, hope, and charity. Faith, hope, and charity. The greatest sin against faith is heresy. You deny the teachings of the church. The sin against hope is despair or presumption. But the sin against charity, which is the highest theological virtue in the church in an ecclesiastical way, is schism. Because schism is creating a divorce, if you want to think about it like that. The body of Christ is one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. So if you were to come in and say, no, we're going to have 2, or we're going to break away start our own church, the Presbyterian church, the Lutheran church, the Anglican church. We're going to break off and create our own watermark Bible community church. You are acting against the love of God, against the charity of God, because we have to love God and love our neighbor. Those are the two greatest commandments. The greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like unto it. Love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Jesus taught that in the Gospels. So if you're going to rip apart the one body of Christ, you are sinning against divine charity, against God and against your neighbor being your brother in Christ in the church. So Thomas Aquinas says that schism is a mortal sin, heresy is a mortal sin, but schism is way worse than heresy. It's worse to divide the church than it is to teach a heresy. By the way, both of them are mortal sins. Both of them excommunicate you from the church, and both of them send you to hell. So you can't say, well, I'm just doing heresy, you're doing schism. No, you're both going to hell. You're both excommunicated. Pius XII said that there are three sins that remove you from the body of Christ, that kick you out of the Catholic Church de facto. Heresy, schism, and apostasy. What is apostasy? Apostasy is different from heresy. Heresy means I'm a Christian, but I deny these doctrines. Apostasy is I deny Christ and the whole thing. All right, so that is what apostasy is. Pope Pius XII said that apostasy, heresy, and schism remove you from the visible church. But here's the problem. Pope Francis put out a document, I did a whole show on it, where he says that apostasy, heresy, and schism do not remove you from the church. So Pius XII says one thing, Francis says the other. Which one's right? I'm going with Pius XII. All right, let's do. Oh, we got more super chats. Here we go. I'll finish out these super chats because I've already gone over 3 hours today. I did 2 hours before with Dr. Gavin, and now we're over an hour here. My goodness. Belos de mi alma. I'm from Argentina. We aren't like Francis. C. Monsaguer is from our country. C. Our vice president. She is Catholic. Our president, not so much. I think she's talking about Malay. Thank you for telling us that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of great Argentinians. I don't think just because a pope comes from Argentina is bad.